My name is Priya Guha. I met some of you earlier today, and introduce my Fireside chat companion for the afternoon, the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation, Patrick Vallance. Patrick, it's great to have you here, and I think particularly wonderful to see a friend of the UK-India relationship joining us, although it's not the first time you've joined IGF. You joined by video conference a few months ago in Mumbai, which was much appreciated. But we've talked a lot today about where the UK-India collaboration is at the moment in these issues. But I'd like to maybe cast your mind to the future. If we were going to look at the UK-India relationship across the board in science, research and innovation, what do you think it should look like?
Well, I think, first of all, there is already a strong relationship, and I think it's growing. And I view the relationship in sort of three broad groups. There's what's the government-to-government relationship around science and technology, and obviously there's the ongoing security agreement around that. There's also, of course, the more comprehensive plan being put in place. But government-to-government relationships on science aren't actually what drives everything. It has to be a scientist to scientist as well. So there's the academic links, which are important, and there are many universities with strong links there that can be built on. And of course, there's good programs for exchange of people, and exchange of people often drives those collaborations. So I'd like to see more of that. And then there is the really important part of businesses. And increasingly, that isn't just the major companies, and we know there's lots of interactions between major companies, but it's what it means for startups. What are the opportunities for a second base for a startup, or a talent scouting for startups or scale-ups as they begin to get more and more important in this innovation system? And so I think we need to look at it through all those three and work out what this looks like as India becomes an increasingly powerful player in the science and tech space, and of course in the innovation space.
So here in the UK, last week, the government just announced its multi-year budget in the spending review process, which I know you are heavily involved with. But with record investments having been announced in R&D, AI, energy, NHS transformation, how do you see this shaping the UK-India future collaboration in these areas? Well,
it's important to recognise that I think there are sort of three buckets of science funding. There's curiosity-driven, basic science, individual investigator type research, which will always be a sort of thing that collaborates as it needs to. There is the work that is related to government priorities, and that's relevant to the question you just asked, where we've got an industrial strategy coming out in the next couple of weeks, which will list the 8 sectors that we're working on. That's got to be a good foundation for where there can be partnerships, because those are the things that we're interested in. Obviously, India's got areas that you're interested in, and we need to make sure that we get some opportunity across those sectors. And the third is obviously around the question of the company space as well. But I think there are big opportunities in areas like AI and healthcare. I mean, it's going to be transformed over the next decade, and we've got quite complementary skills across our countries, which we should think about how to leverage. And the impact of that for health of the population is huge. We already know that there are big relationships between our countries around things like vaccines. How could that be developed further? The world doesn't need fewer vaccines. It needs vaccines across broader areas. It needs more discovery, again, in the AI space as well around that. So I think that's an area. I think we can also see emerging areas like quantum, where there are already links developing. Quantum is moving from a purely scientific question to an engineering and a delivery and a commercial question as well, where again there may well be opportunities that we should explore. And we know we've already got collaborations between companies, so places like ARM for semiconductor design and Ola for EVs are already collaborating. I'd like to see more of that going on. I think there are opportunities here which, after all, our countries have got very long-standing collaborative roots and a lot of similarities in terms of the training process and so on. It feels to me like a natural place for us to have stronger relationships.
Well, you've just referred to it there, and indeed in your previous comments, of how fundamental people are to this relationship. And I think all of us in this room would recognise that talent is actually one of the key levers for the UK and India to harness their mutual strengths. How do you think both countries can ensure this mobility is strategic, is smooth and genuinely two-way?
Well, I think we've already got schemes to allow people to swap for short periods, and I think that's very well taken up and very well used. Recently, it was announced here on the immigration white paper that there'd be a much smoother, easier route for the global talent visa, which I think is important. We've always, in this country, been completely dependent in our science and tech system on immigration. And it's a really important, I mean, it's obvious, but it's an important thing to say. And if you look at our Nobel Prize winners, a third of them were first or second generation immigrants, including Venki, of course. So, you know, we need to make sure that we are as open as possible. And I think increasingly that two-way movement is going to happen, where there are lots of opportunities in India. There are lots of places that are doing outstanding work, where I think we should be looking for much more mobility between the sectors, and indeed thinking about partnerships between institutions and universities that facilitate that. And my experience is that it requires, you know, three things really to happen there. It needs institutions to want to work together and to make it easy. It requires the people involved in those institutions to actually think about the areas which are most exciting, because at the end of the day, that's what drives the whole thing. And then the role of government is to try and oil the wheels of that and to make sure that we can make that as easy as possible and not get in the way of it happening.
Now, I know in both this role and in the previous role, you've been heavily involved with the Global Talent Visa that you referenced. I'm sure many in the room are actually probably recipients of a Global Talent Visa, but maybe for those who've not come across it before, you could just give us 2 seconds on what it is.
Well, it's a visa that allows people to come to the UK. It isn't working as quickly as it should do, but the idea is that it's somebody with special skills, somebody with something that they would bring to the UK in certain areas, and there'll be definitely a preference, by the way, around the industrial strategy sectors for this, which will make that an easier route to take. And it provides, I think, of all the visa systems, that's the one that actually people think makes a difference to getting skilled people into the UK at this sort of level that we're talking about, of highly skilled people who are bringing either technical, entrepreneurial, science skills to the country.
Fantastic. So you have an additional role beyond that long list of things that I said you had responsibility for as a minister when I introduced you, and that is as the champion, the innovation champion for Oxford and Cambridge corridor. So would you like to maybe just give us 2 seconds on what that role actually is, and maybe how you think those sorts of innovation corridors could actually collaborate as corridors with their counterparts in places like India?
Yeah, so we're very excited about this. I mean, nobody in this room needs to be told that Oxford and Cambridge are good universities. You don't need to tell anyone in the world that they know that. And there's lots of innovation going on in both those places, but both places are becoming constrained by their ability to expand. And both places can connect easily to London. And so we always talk about the golden triangle, where so much of the research innovation takes place. But actually, the truth is the golden triangle is missing a hypotenuse, because Oxford and Cambridge are not properly connected. So the idea is, if we can connect them, by the way, this is a very old idea. People have been talking about it for 40 years or more. It hasn't happened. Very simply, the task that I was asked to take on by the Chancellor is to make it happen. Make sure that we get the connectivity. And in the connectivity, think about how all of that corridor can contribute to growth, innovation, how everybody in that corridor can benefit. So it's not just about two shiny objects at the end. It's about making scale-up space. It's about improving life chances for people there. It's about educational opportunities across the corridor. It's about making sure that is a thriving innovation hub, building on the areas that we know we're already good at there, which are life sciences, certainly lots of the physical sciences, big equipment areas around Oxford, which provide unique facilities. And people often say, well, why would you do that, given that there's also already a lot of money going into London, Oxford, and Cambridge? And the answer is quite simple, which is I think any other country in the world would really rather like to have Oxford, Cambridge, and the connection. We must build on that, and we must make the full potential of what's there. So we're really trying to drive this, everything from housing to ensure that a postdoc or a young lecturer or a young entrepreneur would have somewhere that they can afford to live in that area, somewhere where if your company falls over, which we know lots do, you don't have to move somewhere. You can just go straight to the next one in the other city or just along the line, and how we start to get those scale-up opportunities of companies really working in that area. So that, I think, is going to be a truly internationally competitive hub of innovation. It links to London, and there are massive opportunities to link to other places in the world, and we expect to see very significant inward interest in not only investment, but also placing companies there, thinking about collaborations, thinking about what the opportunities are there for companies adjacent to some of the research areas who might be in the supply chain for some of this as well.
So a final question for you. We just talked then about the Oxford-Cambridge corridor and the exciting things that are happening there. And obviously we're here in London right next to Imperial and other amazing higher education institutions. But one of the things that was very clear in the spending review is the focus on innovation at place across the UK. And maybe just talk a little bit, if you may, to finish off about what you've seen when in this job you've travelled around the UK to visit those sites of research and innovation.
So there is great stuff going on all over the place. You know, you can come across an individual researcher or an individual company. And in fact, I came across one earlier this week when I was in Boston, US, and somebody came up to me and told me about the company they run in somewhere called King's Lynn, which I had no idea we had this company in King's Lynn. Very innovative, exciting company. And he told me about others that are there. So wherever you go, you find pockets of excellence. What is important, though, is clusters. And clusters really matter because of this point about getting critical mass, allowing people to fail and know that they're not completely insecure because they've got somewhere else they can go to. And what I see is growing up all around the UK, significant clusters. Big cluster in Manchester, cluster around Edinburgh, great work going on in Liverpool, Bristol. They've got different flavours to them. They're all doing something a little bit different. And that's also important, that it isn't everything looking the same. So I think you'll find great work going on everywhere. Clusters are important for the reasons that I've discussed. And everything needs to have an international perspective. And that's really critical, because if we don't have that international perspective, we cannot end up with these growing and getting the appropriate market and development.
Minister Vallance, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.